Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you had a good lunch. Remember, it's November for those of you who are coming from the East. And those of us out here, we don't notice things like that anymore, but it's a nice November, I think. So we spent the morning really talking about the demand side of the equation, of the talent equation. What do companies need? What are the specific competencies and skills and talents that they are looking for? So we're going to switch now to the supply side of the equation. We've talked about the pipeline. Well, the two gentlemen who are with me here at the table understand both the demand side and also the supply side. They have worked on the supply side of the equation in a number of different institutions. Peter Lee is especially has a career that has taken him to a variety of different places. Carnegie Mellon, engineering faculty there, computers and all that stuff, computer science. Taught there for a number of years, worked with federal government at DARPA. DARPA?
It's DARPA now.
It's DARPA now, it was then.
It depends on the president, it flows back and forth.
Okay. But they're the people who brought you the internet and all that other cool stuff. Very senior official there, and is now directing the Microsoft Labs, Microsoft Research. And so he is a gentleman who really does understand the demand side as well as the supply side. Colin McClay on my far left, politically and positionally, has also had a very, very interesting career. He's kind of a third spacer kind of guy, personified. He's now running the digital initiative at the Harvard Business School, so he brings that perspective. He really was the driving force behind the Berkman Center at the Harvard Law School, so he has that perspective. He's worked also in public policy schools and has worked in government and nonprofits, and he started all of this when he was 9 years old. He was very precocious at 9. So I thought what we would do for this panel is I'm going to ask the panelists to sort of describe what's going on in the fields that they know in universities. So what's happening there. Analytically, what's working, what's not working in this third space area. And then thirdly, maybe say something about what universities should do to try to improve the supply of third space talents. I would also like to leave a fair amount of time at the end so we can have some, real Q&A. So I'll ask you to make your comments brief, and then we'll open it up to the group formerly known as the audience. Colin, do you want to start?
Sure. So thanks, Ernie, and thanks to the whole Annenberg team. It's so great to be here celebrating the launch of this new building and to be talking about this research for the first time kind of in this forum. So I'm really honored to be here and, of course, excited by the weather, too. But that's secondary. So as Ernie said, I've had an odd career where I've kind of moved from unintentionally, in fact, at Harvard across all these different schools and operated typically at the intersection of different spaces. So for me, where so much value is created is between one sector and another, one industry and another, one discipline and another. And it's the folks, the rare folks who can traverse those gaps that really create and so much and unleash so much value. And that's why I think one of the many reasons, but the primary reason that I think the third space contribution that we're making here today is so important. I've seen it time and again, and I've been fortunate to see both students and faculty who are skilled and talented, let's say, and those who are not. And I think by and large, the academy, and I would say with all due respect to my fabulous employers over the years, Kennedy School, Law School, Business School, are coming up short on this front. I think there is kind of lip service and goodwill to do these things, but I think a lack of awareness. It's not built into the curricula. It's not valued in the way it needs to be. the research isn't there that makes it legitimate and real for faculty and for students. So the place where I've seen the greatest hope is in the other ways that students get involved in research centers, for instance, in the Berkman Center for Internet Society, where we invited students to do all this real-world work, to work with people who weren't like them, to work on challenging new problems, to engage in different ways, to push themselves to develop new skill sets. So we provided a venue to do that. I would say it's more rare than it should be within academia. At the business school, there are lots of opportunities for this kind of thing to happen. We do, at HBS, it's all case-based learning, so that means every case is a story, there's lots of conversation, it's all people talking to each other and interacting with others, but I don't think there's a tension currently to empathy, or maybe to 360-degree thinking, perhaps to adaptability. To the extent that there is a tension, it's not a concerted attention, and I don't think so it's not called out. The skill, to the extent that there is a skill associated with the awareness piece of the development, isn't developed as a skill. And I would see these as, if I'm thinking about what does a university do, it's you highlight what these issues are, these concerns, these skills are. You help give the opportunity to understand them and to develop them. You help give a chance for reflection and for change and for growth, right? So it's like a muscle in that sense. And we are really set up to kind of create the opportunities, but we don't have any of the follow-through. So you have it in case-based learning, you have it in some courses, which we try to get students closer to doing actual things, and I think that the actual practice part is key here. Now we have design thinking, product management 101 and 102, a series of other kind of course settings where students are doing real things, working with teams, and getting the chance again to develop some of these capacities, but not without them being called out, highlighted, and had given the opportunity to kind of develop their own capacity as they move forward. So I think that, as I was just saying to Peter, we're operating at a pretty low level of efficiency. There are lots of learning opportunities that exist, and we're kind of leaving them on the table. And, the question is, how can we use existing systems, those courses or the cases that we do teach or the work that we already do, our relationships with industry, which are, when we have them, are hugely productive, but take time and energy to set up. Can we use those existing structures and harvest those lessons and share out the skills for students to continue to develop these talents? Or do we need to start new efforts? And I guess I would submit to you in the belt and suspenders way, my metaphor for the morning, I think we need to do both. So you look for opportunities to build that into the stuff that we're already doing in perhaps a lightweight way, but you also add other structures which are really intended to do this. And the one that we have that I think is most kind of relevant right now at the business school is the field program, in which every first-year student spends the fall developing a relationship with a company in an emerging market, sets up a consulting project, and then in the middle of the year travels there for 10 days to do consulting work in one of 20 emerging markets around the world, and then comes back and starts a company. Now, two things. One, that's a boatload of money, even for Harvard Business School. That clearly doesn't scale, and there's arguably, I think it's a great opportunity, and those students go to places that they would never go, and they are, in the ways we were discussing this morning, they are given the opportunity to really expand their horizons. I suspect, however, that even in that setting, which is much more attuned to these issues, that we don't get nearly the value out of them that we should or could.
So it sounds like part of what you're saying, Colin, is that there's some pretty cool stuff that's going on that would fit under this third space rubric, if you will, but it hasn't been, to use your term, called out. It hasn't. We haven't put a wire frame around that to say that this component and this component and this component is supportive of this third space idea, which the companies tell us they really need in order to be innovative and creative and successful. So I wonder, Peter, how does that, coming from an engineering school as you have, how does that play out in that context?
Right, and I have to say, I have really, we had a chance to have lunch, and the lunchtime conversation really sparked new thoughts, and so I'm going to try some. I had some thoughts, of course, ahead of time, having read the very interesting paper on third space, but I'm now starting to see things maybe with a little more nuance. Let me say, first of all, thank you for having me here, and thank you for the nice introduction. I don't get introductions that often that make me feel right-wing and old compared to, but you managed to do
Well,
that.
good. I'm that kind of host. I'm empathetic.
I was a research professor at Carnegie Mellon for a long time in computer science, but I had several administrative positions, including being an undergraduate dean, and then head of computer science at CMU, and in that position ran graduate admissions. And so that sounds like I'm qualified for this discussion, but Carnegie Mellon, like Harvard, is not the normal situation. I would characterize Carnegie Mellon's programs as boutique programs, and meaning that they have the luxury of being able to select a very small entering class. But still, having said that, that didn't mean that we weren't thinking hard about or nibbling around the edges in a kind of nebulous way around the third space concept, or around soft skills, around empathy, around communications, and so on. And so many, there's, as you probably have experiences in your own higher education interactions, many experiments take place. Lots of ideas, all in the name of advancing what kind of people we produce. And as I listen to Colin and Ernie over lunch and reflect on reading the paper, I start now to have a sense that third space, in a way, can be viewed as going back to basics. You know, as I think at least of engineering education, over the past 30 years of my career, it has become sharply more practical in its outcomes. We really have advanced tremendously our kind of foresight and ability to train students to really have significant technical depth and skills, and connect with industry, go out into the workforce after graduation, become instantly productive. I think, in fact, computer science especially, but that's probably a statement broadly about engineering fields. But of course, if you step back and think about the educational process that most of us went through, it was something different, at least for me, I suspect for most of us, except for the young people, like Colin.
Left-wing, yeah.
Right, left-wing young people. In the sense that there was more of an emphasis on liberal education, on instilling the virtue of lifelong learning, of activism in the community, and so on. And as I think about that, the kinds of things that we do, at least in engineering education, aren't that. They're still very practical. So we will inject into engineering curriculum new communications and speaking skills requirements. We will inject new interdisciplinary programs to force students to work with humanities and design students. We will send students out into the field to intern or to do meaningful projects. All of that is very good, but I think, as I think about this now, it misses the point a little bit about where third space goes. And so the thing that then I thought I should inject into the conversation here is this. As old people, I'm going to count myself as an old person and most of us in this room, we live in a very practical world, and we think very hard about actually solving real problems in the world, conquering societal grand challenges, doing good things for our own careers and our own families and communities. It's easy to forget that as a 17-year-old kid, that's not the primary motivator, at least for smart 17-year-old kids. The kids have a much stronger core of idealism in them. The joke I told at lunch is that a kid that opts to go to Caltech to study physics is not a normal kid. That is a kid that's the moral equivalent today of joining a monastery. And the point there is that there's an idealistic core in young people, and they're hoping to go to a place like USC to join a community of idealists. And so as I think about that, then what is the idealism for a business student or for an engineering student or for a third place student? And maybe in the business student, the idealism is success and achievement. And therefore, the educational outcomes would be going towards being able to think strategically instead of tactically and so on. For engineering, it's problem solving and invention, and solving practical problems in the world might be a great outcome. For third space, I start to wonder if there's a stronger element of activism, of actually having outcomes that enable one to create more out of where the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, kind of thinking and activism in communities, in organizations, and so on. And so, just in the few hours I've been here, I have to say that the thinking, my wondering about all of this has just evolved significantly.
So can I,
Yeah.
in a conversation, it's always good to have a little bit of disagreement. So I'm going to just go on the record and say I disagree completely.
Well, we're on opposite ends of the political spectrum after all.
Clearly, we're not so far on that we meet, or maybe by the end. I think what's different in the different schools is you find people who have gone for different modes in which they want to use to change the world. And that there's a distribution in any of those schools of some people who may be more self-maximizing and others who may be more do-gooders and everywhere on the spectrum in between, but they're just choosing a different tool set to do that. So when you described engineers, innovation, that's what a lot of the students at the business school want to do. And when you describe social justice, that's what a lot of people at the law school want to do. And so I think you see that, and what I've learned, for me, the reason I was excited to go to the business school is because that's a way to change from the inside out, right? There's only so much that government can do, or that the civil society can do, but business has a huge amount of power. And so I think you actually see a distribution within each of those schools. Yeah. And so one of the interesting things about the third space thinking is that it's relevant in each of those settings. And I think one of the challenges that they face is they tend, and I can say Harvard Business School for sure, is isolated. And it forgoes the opportunity, in the way that we were discussing, to mix with other disciplines and with other perspectives. And getting back to the diversity session this morning, I feel like that the diversity question, diversity of thinking and of modes of engagement and of strategies is so essential and so kind of inextricably paired with the third space thinking in a way that it both benefits from that thinking and it forces you into that mode, right? And as we think about where we go forward from here, for me, it's a recognition, the writing is on the wall, that we all need to be doing that better. And the question is can we agree on that? And if so, how do we kind of start to have our practice reflect that?
I want to open it up to the group formerly known as the audience, but I do have one question for you, and this is kind of tactical. If we think of this sort of in concentric circles, so you've got a school, it could be the communication school or the engineering school or the business school, there are some interior curricular changes that could be made, or activities or requirements. Then there's sort of a cross-campus strategy, my school talking to your school, talking to your school, and then beyond that, there are honorary societies like or professional societies like the National Research Council, where you and I sit on a board together. Could you each say something about how you would think those things would fit together on a campus, sort of within the school, across the campus, multiple schools, and then sort of beyond that? Peter?
Wow, that's really, really interesting. I think one of the challenges here, and I think Colin was sort of hinting at this, is at least from my experience, things would get tactical very, very quickly. And maybe that has to happen because you do need curriculum, you do need some idea about educational outcomes. But the problem with that is, I think, as Colin had mentioned in his opening remarks, a lot of pieces are there already, and there is actually a tremendous amount of invention that goes on in higher education today, and so it's not clear to me how a university structure can kind of impose now some superstructure to create kind of a coherent educational or even curricular concept. Maybe one thing that a university could think about, at least in its own campus, is to create some mechanism for more efficiently creating what I would call end-to-end experiences. And these are sort of like the case study ideas that you had mentioned. By end-to-end, in the engineering context, a project normally stops at thinking about what technical problem are you trying to solve. But when you are thinking end-to-end, you're actually forcing students to try to think, well, if you were to solve that technical problem, and you have to do some planning to do that, how will you turn that technical solution into impact? You know, what is the plan? Is there a deployment somewhere? Is there an application to some person or some condition in the real world? And that end-to-end thinking is something that seems to me really would give a place for third space educational thinking to really plug in and maybe take a more central role. In a place like Microsoft Research that I run now, we actually have shifted a lot of what we do into teams that are forced to think end-to-end, because it's no longer good enough in the tech industry to just solve problems if they never make it to market, or if they never make it into people's hands. And I think that a lot of the shift towards interdisciplinary and kind of real-world experiences for students are sort of aimed at the same thing.
So maybe another way of saying end-to-end would be 360 degrees,
right.
if you sort
Yes.
of,
Yes.
but that's my cheap shot.
So I want to plus one on that. I think that's spot on. And, you know, I think it's a real failing of the system, the dominant system, both at that I'm familiar with at the business school and at the Kennedy School, and also at Harvard, where, you know, in a case-based setting, you kind of solve a problem. What should they do? You make the decision, and you kind of understand some context around it. But I think in the way, exactly in the way that Peter described, the really interesting thing is seeing that whole trajectory, that whole arc, and all the challenges at each of those stages. And so if you're able to work, for instance, in a setting with different people and kind of different disciplines reflected, you have the opportunity to use those different skill sets and to understand how you kind of take on the different stages of that problem differently. So I think that's a great thing to think about for existing stuff and for potential next steps, and something where there's energy for. So, but let me answer your other question super briefly. I'm not going to, but I'm going to change. I'm going to hack it. Sorry. I don't think the difference is so much about in between school, across university, and so on. There are differences, of course. I think the point is, as you pointed out, or as you suggested, it's kind of a top-down, bottom-up issue. And so I think ultimately have to have both, right? So you need leadership at the top, which suggests this stuff is important and puts structures or programs in place to create the incentive structures and rewards, or at least eliminate the barriers for this kind of stuff to happen. And then on the bottom-up side, you can't, if any of you have spent time in a university, you'll know you cannot force anything. Not even if you're an all-powerful, very charismatic, handsome young dean.
But right-wing, unfortunately.
You can only do so much. And so I think the trick is that, but the interesting thing about universities is that you have these students who are all over the map, you have faculty, you have all these other kind of weird little communities there who have lots of great ideas. And if you can figure out a way to encourage the great ideas and to shape some and give them the resources, and in many cases they may be intellectual resources, curricula, or research, better understanding about what the marketplace wants and how to get there, then you can start to see them coming up with way better ideas than we at the top could have ever come up with. So I think, there are structures and places, and you see places like the Annenberg Innovation Lab, or at Harvard, the iLab, places where there's kind of a neutral territory that blends schools, as John was saying this morning, and has different modes, where those are great places to introduce this kind of thinking. And then you demonstrate, and other people come there and they say, oh my goodness, there's action there. Those students are amazing. I want to recruit those students. I want to work with those faculty. I want to do that. So then you have a demonstration, and I think that top-down, bottom-up will sort it out.
Well, I only wish we had in the room maybe someone who'd been president of 2 universities and run the National Science Foundation and is a professor of engineering and education. And if we only had somebody like that in the room, it might make an interesting transition to the group formerly known as the audience. But fortunately, John Slaughter is here, Dr. Professor John Slaughter, who meets all of those criteria. He's done all of that. And so, John, I'd like to ask you, based on your experience in all these different institutions, is whether or not you believe, let's start with the engineering profession, whether you believe that the engineering profession really, really has an appetite to make the kinds of learning, cognitive, professional changes that we're talking about, or have they gone so far down the line that Peter has described of, power but narrowness, that it's not a very likely outcome. So can we have a microphone to Professor Slaughter? And then I want to have, open it up to others as well.
Thank you. Thanks for the straight line. I spent the first 15 to 20 years of my career as a practicing engineer until I decided that I really enjoyed working with people at least as much, if not more, than working with things. So I began to move more into what you're referring to now as third space thinking without realizing what I was doing. The one concern, or the major concern I have about the engineering profession is that it is not making the adjustment quickly enough. And that can be seen in many, many ways. It certainly can be seen in the fact that our faculties in our schools of engineering across the country have not made diversity and equity a high priority. Only 2% of the engineering faculty in the top-rated engineering schools in this country are people of color. And if you eliminate the HBCUs, it's 1%. That is a major problem because while at the same time the schools are talking about increasing the diversity of their student bodies, without increasing the diversity of the faculty, it certainly is not going to happen in a meaningful way, and definitely not at the graduate school level, because young people are much smarter than they were when I came along. They look to see who's leading the classroom, who's leading the research laboratories, and if they don't see people who look somewhat like themselves, they question whether or not the sincerity exists in the institution. And I think sincerity is really the critical component. I also think that we need to make a dramatic change in the way in which our students are taught. I'm distressed by the fact that a research study indicated that over the 4-year period, 4 to 5 year period that undergraduate students are in the study of engineering, their commitment to social responsibility declines. That in and of itself is an indication that we're failing to do what is necessary to move into a third phase thinking kind of environment. I agree with what John Iwata said in his video this morning about the importance of an appreciation for the liberal arts. I teach a course called Science, Technology, and Society, and when I interact with, it's a freshman seminar, and when I interact with freshman engineering students, I always tell them that they need to certainly broaden their thinking, that they need to sample the liberal arts. I say it's it's important to study Bach as well as botany, Carlyle as well as chemistry, Dickinson as well as differential equations, Isaiah as well as isotopes, Milton as well as molecules, and Michelangelo as well as microcomputers. And to answer your question, I think we've got a long way to go in the field of engineering. I'm encouraged by the fact that organizations like the American Society for Engineering Education are beginning to urge movement in this regard. Our own dean of the Viterbi School of Engineering, Yanis Yartsos, is leading the effort to increase the commitment to diversity and equity in the Engineering Dean's Council across the country. I just hope his faculty will follow.
I just wanted to react quickly. I think that the comments are really inspirational in a way, and to my mind, just reinforces the thoughts about liberal education and about social activism as elements that I characterize as back to basics, because I think that there is some emphasis, maybe it's gotten drowned out a little bit over the past 25 or 30 years as technical education has evolved, and that as I reflect, say, on engineering education at Carnegie Mellon, it's a very intensive 4-year experience. In fact, you start as an engineering or computer science major as an entering freshman. And so you do get an exceptionally thorough technical depth in education there, but and even if the rest of the stuff hasn't diminished in quantity, it certainly in proportion, I think, has become much less prominent.
Can I just, let me just do one thing. Elisa Schreiber is in the room, and she voted with her feet. She used to be in a university, it shall remain nameless, and then went to work for a company which shall remain nameless, Hulu, and then left that and is now up in Silicon. So why did you leave the university? I mean, did you give up on the university, or is this, you said there's not enough third space thinking here, so I'm going to, so what's been your experience?
I feel like you're giving me a layup, and I feel like I'm not going to make the basket for you because it's a little different than that. Yeah, so my personal experience here, I was really fortunate to have been the director of marketing at the USC Stevens Institute for Innovation when it was in the office of the provost, and it was a university-wide initiative. And I think what was special about that moment in time, I know the center has since evolved, but at that moment in time, the executive director attracted a group of people that kind of self-identified as builders and as entrepreneurs, and we all had come from entrepreneurial backgrounds, had built companies, had worked in startups, things like that, and we're committed to fostering a sense of innovation across the university campus. So while I was here for 4 years. I also studied here at Marshall School of Business. I got my MBA while I worked here as well, and you know, for me, I felt like I built something really great, and then I wanted to go build something else. So it wasn't a sense of giving up on the university. In fact, I was incredibly proud of the fact that USC had put that kind of resource behind fostering a culture of innovation here. You know, it enabled us to do things like start the pilot for the TEDx program, which is now, yeah, that's correct. So that was me and Z. We built that. So I think that, you know, for me, and maybe this goes back to the third space, and I know, Ernie, early on when we were talking about this, what I connected to so deeply as part of this mission was that it kind of just summed up everything that I had seen in people like me, which is, you know, you want to build, you want to be around product, you want to make impact, you want to do things that are going to, you know, fundamentally change the way we live, we work, and we play. And how do you do that by pulling together all these different cross-disciplinary, teams of cross-discipline, and then also in yourself, do you understand business operations? Do you understand product? Do you understand design? Do you understand communications? Do you understand finance? And how all these things kind of work together to create something great. And so that's what drove me. And when I, got the chance to work at Hulu, obviously it was on another team of entrepreneurs who were trying to build the future of television. So that was really exciting. And now I get to work in venture capital and help entrepreneurs create the future.
Great experience.
Yeah. Yeah.
Other comments? Yes, Rick?
The question strikes me, is third space education the provenance solely of the elite institution? So if not, and if we are to educate the masses, what of community college or MOOCs and distance learning? How does that all play into this conversation?
On the subject of MOOCs in particular, we had a little bit of discussion over lunch, and I do worry, at least the concepts that seem the most tangible right now also seem to be expensive and inefficient. and so if you're talking about just really putting teams of students out in the world to really do something end to end, the level of kind of care and kind of guidance and assessment, everything that has to happen is, it's not obvious how those things scale. And so when I mentioned before, having university leadership really try to think hard about how to approach that and how to achieve scale. But it's not clear that there are answers there, but it seems like a very important problem.
So I want to pick up on the other part of that, the kind of the not elitists like us. We were just the only folks available. But I actually...
Feeling more right.
Exactly. We're just, we were also having part of this conversation, and this is either optimistic or realistic, I'm not sure, maybe both. The elite institutions actually have, with rare exception, a lot less reason to change, right? There's not really reason for Harvard, frankly, to take a risk. Why should we take a risk? And that's the view. Now, the language may be that we want to innovate and we want to change, and we want to always improve, but ultimately, when you get into like the human and individual and organizational stuff, the idea of doing something hard or challenging or risky is not really appealing. Now, and in the rest of the, all the other not super elite institutions, I feel like their incentives are much better aligned to distinguish themselves, to do things differently, and to actually take some risks to mix it up. So I think, it may be that the incentives are actually in the favor of doing some of that stuff, which is, I think, exciting and promising. It still requires leadership, someone at the top who's going to legitimize that grassroots activity and kind of create the space for it. The other thing is that I think is more challenging is that we also, the elite institutions, have good, as in this room, have excellent relationships with industry. And I think that the industry tie here is key to making all this stuff work. It's so powerful, and the incentives are wonderfully aligned among industry and the schools, right? They want to get the next generation of great folks, and they want to meet them while they're young, and they want to help them be trained when they arrive and kind of know each other already. We want them to be in touch with the marketplace and knowing what they need. So it's great if you can do it. It takes work, but it's a lot easier for the elite institutions to have those relationships. I think lots of the the second tier and below, they will have those ties, but they don't always have them as developed in my experience. I don't think that means they can't. I think they have to work hard, but what you find, I would say, my colleagues in those schools is that they do way more great stuff. They do so much great stuff, and they work harder for it because they don't have the light shined on them all the time. So I'm optimistic, hopeful at least. I think getting down to community college is probably a little more complicated, but again, I think there's an answer at every level.
Let me ask a question. We've kind of been focusing on, appropriately, on this panel on education, but that's just the start of the pipeline. And so I guess what I would like to throw out to this group is, if we take it downstream a little further to things like executive education, does that make sense to provide third space skills to populations who are already in the industry? And maybe if there are any thoughts on, if you think about your own institution, If someone came in and said, I have a great deal for you, we want to provide executive education in these skills because they cost 4 sectors of the American economy $1 trillion, and maybe you could gain some of that savings. So let me just toss out this idea of whether, moving a little further downstream, whether executive education is a likely partial solution to the issues that we're talking about. Yeah, Michael.
Yeah, Ernie, I think to really nail a curriculum, I think any institution would be thrilled to have a resource that they could suck into their organization. You know, you already see consultants galore out there with time management for employees, leadership training, collaboration training, breakthrough training. If it could be sold, it's sold, and corporations will buy anything they can buy to make their people better somehow, more effective, more efficient, more curious. So if we could crack the code and create that, that business model, that training model, then I think there's a huge market for it.
Yes. Maybe we should say who we are, too. I mean, I should have said that at the very beginning, and I apologize. But Michael Nime is also a member of our board of counselors and runs a very successful, large public engagement, public relations company.
My name is Una Fox. I'm with Disney. I work in a technology organization, and I'm a liberal arts graduate. So I've been in technology for 20 years, worked in Silicon Valley. I think to Michael's point is because I think that for a corporate organization, we tend to like very templated guidance. And even without you in the room, Ernie, to do an incredible explanation of what third space thinking is, I think it might be difficult for corporations to grasp onto that. So how can you give some very specific direction on a curriculum, or how you develop a third space thinking skills? So one of the things that I think about, and particularly it's from personal experience and based on my background, because I was an English major, there are studies that have come out recently, and I hesitate to quote studies in a room of academics because I don't know the exact details, but both from, I think, the University of Toronto and I believe a university in England, which studied the empathy of executives who have come from liberal arts backgrounds and the reading of literature. And so is there something as, forgive me for suggesting something so simplistic, but in an engineering program that there would be a literature stream that engineers have to read Dostoevsky, or they have to read. It's just something very, very simplistic, but I know I'm not really answering your question about the corporate thing, but then how could that lead into an executive education program? Because I don't know if you can start teaching executives that have, the feet on the street for many years to start reading literature, but I do think you can impact that at the university level.
Excellent point. Peter, did you?
So on this, on the specific, so I just putting my corporate hat on, let me say I have a very similar reaction about just thinking about my organization in Microsoft. But on the specific point about literature, it's stunning. It's absolutely important. So it's something I impose actually on my team, and it's not that I get. No one complains and pushes. I don't know that I get enthusiastic engagement, but I try to make myself feel satisfied that I send a message just simply by imposing the requirement, by expressing that it's that important and that there's something about taking the time. It's not just edifying; it's also cleansing. To step back and focus on something like a great book, and if you think about trying to create the appropriate culture of a creative organization, that maximizes the chances that that happy accident of great discovery has a little bit of a better chance to take place. You know, gut sense is that things like this, you know, help more than hurt, and so it just seems important.
I'm going to call in a minute on Peter Marks, but you know that it also raises the question of flipping it back to the morning discussion. If the executives in the company say part of your annual compensation and your likelihood for promotion will depend on the amount or the quality of diverse voices that you recruit into the firm or that you promote, my hunch is that that would be at least as important as another course at the Annenberg School or the engineering school. And maybe the same thing is true for being broadly literate, which I think is hugely important. But how much leeway, or what would it take for, let's say, large American companies to be able to impose those requirements and say, you must have these attributes? The other thing, the one group I think that does this is the Aspen Institute. I don't know if any of you have ever been to their executive education programs, but you read Plato and you read, Marx, and you read Machiavelli and, the Torah and so forth. So but I'm not sure that has changed much. It's a great time in Aspen. But what would have to happen inside American organizations to reward that kind of? Well, let me do this. Talk amongst yourselves is the TV program. So let's maybe put that on the agenda as one of the things in the breakout session. Because I want to take one final question here from the back. Peter Marks, please identify yourself, Mr. Marks.
I thought you already did. My name is Peter Marks. Actually, I wanted to continue Una's question. Is that okay? So I'm the Chief Innovation Technology Officer for the City of LA, but I'm asking this question just as a person. And so I went to UCLA, and I did an English literature degree, and wrote a lot of software. In fact, degrees are in English and science, no computer science. But eventually I wrote a lot of software because it was in a research lab, and being the right age, which was younger, the personal computer came out, the year that I graduated high school, and people sort of said, we need you to go figure out the computer, which turned out to be a blessing. And somehow or another, I snuck into working for Apple Computer, and then a couple of different things. And I found myself the senior research software engineer for electronic arts as an English major. And then, and Peter, you'll remember me from Qualcomm. Eventually, I found myself working for a big communications engineering company called Qualcomm, handling their R&D strategy as an English major. And my corporate bio at the end of it says education, and I actually focused on the English part just for the fun of it. But just bluntly put, you would never have hired me. And I'm because I'm literally in that third space. And at these companies, the difficulty is that they don't put value typically on, they put value because it didn't matter that I was an original beta tester on things like C++ for Bell Labs and things like that, or that I was writing software for doing, 3D imaging of medical studies and things like that. It was the credentials question that is always being asked. And I don't know if UCLA ranks as an elite college or university, but I just had to throw that out just to see the temperature of the room. But that's exactly it. It's one of those really interesting things. How do we solve that conundrum? I mean, I found my way through because I happened to be the right age in the right place with the right skills. But I'm essentially living that divider line, that third space, which is where the original conversation with Dean Wilson that I had maybe a year ago along this episode. Working for a communications company, communications and engineering means something completely different than communications at Annenberg. Yet computer technology companies don't recognize the need. So what do we do?
good transition.
That's a good dodging.
Right. Or a segue. I think it's even better than a transition. It's a segue, whatever that means. So I'd like us to hash out, since all of you are sort of third space types, which is why you're here today, I think. Let's hash this out in the breakout sessions. This really is an opportunity to kind of drill down into the concerns that each and every one of you bring to the day. We will have people in the sessions who will be taking notes, and then we'll come back and report to the whole body about what you've talked about. Now, let me just mention who are going to be the lead. So we'll have somebody taking notes, and then we'll have an agent provocateur to provoke your discussion and reflection. I think you've heard from Elisa Schraber, who is up north, abandoned us here in the south and went up north, from Greylock's Partners, who will be one of them. Michael Nyman, who you heard from recently, and Peter Marks will also be one of the agents provocateurs. I heard a rumor that you might be bringing a note or a message or something?
Yeah, so now I'll stand up and I'll be the professional as opposed to the individual. So as I mentioned, I work for Mayor Eric Garcetti, and I'm the Chief Innovation and Technology Officer for the City of Los Angeles. And the topics in this room are very much very much of interest to the mayor's office. Los Angeles is almost a perfect example of exactly this problem, in that we're blessed with three great universities, right? I'll start with UCLA. I'll go with Caltech, and well, then there's USC. And I've taught here for a long time, so I can tease USC for a bit. But the issue is that in Los Angeles we have an incredibly diverse, amazing city, right? We have people all over the city. You know, we have more people with PhDs in the county of Los Angeles than any other county in the country. Who knew, right? Bill, the LA Economic Development Corporation, published a report a few weeks ago pointing out that the tech economy in Los Angeles is almost as large as the very, very famous creative economies in the city of Los Angeles. In fact, it's better than, I can do this because of comparisons just for fun, but it's actually better than New York. It's even better than Boston, Cambridge, in the sense that it's so big, there are so many jobs here. But the reason why it's such interest to the mayor's office is, quite frankly, because we have a lot of populations that could benefit from the subjects that we're talking about in this room. And so I bring greetings from Mayor Eric Garcetti, who I think is actually a very good example. He's a very tech-friendly mayor. He's very, very, very good on tech. But his background, too, is of a non-technical nature. But he very much sees the vision of how tech can change the city of Los Angeles, not only for the tech economy, but also change the very nature of the city itself. You know, we can use technology to address things like transportation. We have some famous transportation issues. It can do things like it can make, safety. We've published open data. You know, we have an executive director that we've been publishing open data. And so I just wanted to bring a couple of greetings from the mayor and from the mayor's office, and I look forward to the continued conversation.
I'm going to ask Lisa Mulhart to come up. She's Executive Vice President of SY Partners, and they've been very helpful to us in thinking about moving forward and how we can really maximize the brain power that we have here today. So Lisa, why don't you help us out?
Sure, it's nice to meet you all. The dean won't be offended when I say that I'm not actually sure what I'm doing here today, in a really good way. We got introduced, and our company is one of the ones profiled in the working paper. We are a management consulting firm in San Francisco and New York that works with CEOs and CMOs of mostly really big companies on exactly this problem, among others. And so I can confirm that this is actually an obsession of theirs, finding third space talent, growing it, nurturing it, and it's one of ours as well, even though we're only 120 people, but everybody who works in our company I would call a third space thinker. So it's a topic that we're completely preoccupied with. And we knew this was happening and thought, let's get in this room and feel at home and feel uncomfortable and in a new space together. I think this is very interesting to have academics and industry together. And it's all working because there's a little bit of a spirit of generosity here. I think there's been incredible generosity on the part of the panelists to put their thinking out there. The study itself, even in its nascent phase, to be offered up to this group as something that we're all vulnerable about. We're here with some shared angst about the problem and the opportunity, which is awesome. It's like finding a group therapy group that you actually belong to. And I think what I'd like to encourage us to do is to carry that into the afternoon. So there have been some offerings here, some thoughts, ideas, a willingness to take a university and a school within it that's quite powerful and change it to make our lives better in industry, to make us more innovative. And so the afternoon should be about thinking backwards, in my opinion, anyway. And it's what are we going to do as leaders and as companies to make sure that if he mints the most amazing third space talent and helps us figure out how to develop it, that we have companies that can actually take advantage of it and that will help those people thrive and have amazing careers and lives, because it doesn't do any good for all these great people to be out there and land in places that don't know what to do with them. So the afternoon's structured in such a way for us to do some thinking about that and to think about maybe how going forward we can take these two groups and maybe others, maybe with help of government, and move it forward, do something amazing, and really figure out a way to make this a revolution with talent. I'm going to be lame and corny by using that word, but it's true. So the moderators all have some worksheets for you to prompt the conversation. And we just ask that in having the conversation, you think about a next step for this group, because we'll come back at 4 o'clock and discuss that. Try to think of something we can do together that's measurable, that's cross-sector, and maybe that in the doing of it lets us live those third space capabilities, even if they're foreign to some of us. And we'll come back with some great ideas and see what could be possible, rather than just be here as consumers of some really great thinking and some provocation and find a community. Let's offer something back and figure out what we can do together.